Vladimir Putin just sent Trump two not very carefully coded messages, and to borrow the stylings of Vice President Harris, one began with the letter F and the other began with the letter U. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, as I assume you know, has confirmed to Bloomberg News that Bob Woodward's book is right, that Trump did send tests and testing machines early in the COVID nightmare of 2020 to Putin, but quoting Peskov, but about the phone calls, it's not true. Putin just outed Trump as a liar twice in different directions, confirming what he wanted denied, denying what he wanted confirmed. On Tuesday, Trump's spokesmodel, Stephen Chung, insisted the report that, in the window that must have been between March 31st and May 7th, 2020, Trump took COVID tests meant for and desperately needed by Americans and sent them to Putin for Putin's personal use. He insisted that was just a story Woodward had made up. The Kremlin spokesman might as well have called the fatuous Chung a liar and Trump with him. We thus know that Peskov's words also add to the logical extrapolation that somewhere an American must have died because Trump stole the test that might have saved him and diverted it instead to our greatest enemy in this world. The idea that it was just one American denied the test and denied his life that could have led to help that could have saved him, that thought is in fact ludicrously small c conservative at a time when 10,000 of us were dying per week because of Trump's utter mismanagement of and disinterest in the pandemic. Moscow's denial that Putin and Trump have spoken in the last 4 years, meanwhile, the estimate from Woodward's source was 7 times, also paints Trump as a liar. It was Trump, after all, who insisted to the world in the debate with President Biden that he spoke to Putin about Ukraine after this nation's withdrawal from Afghanistan in August 2021, but before Putin's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. It was Trump who name-dropped Putin while ushering an aide out of his office at Marikrapshak earlier this year, according to Woodward, insisting he had to have a private call with the Russian dictator. Just to dig Trump's metaphorical grave on this a little deeper, here comes JV to the rescue. Of Trump's post-presidency dialogue with Putin, J.D. Vance says, quote, even if it's true, is there something wrong with speaking to world leaders? No. Is there anything wrong with engaging in diplomacy? Unquote. Obviously not. If you're a diplomat, if you are an elected official of the United States, if you are not violating the Logan Act by freelancing in international affairs, especially if you're contradicting American policy, which Trump not only confesses to daily but boasts about. Trump is not some sort of international statesman nor American spokesman at this point. He's a guy selling Bibles on TV. But the Logan Act isn't the point here, and not just because it is a toothless law that has never resulted in a successful prosecution and has not even resulted in an unsuccessful prosecution since the year 1852. As Aaron Blake usefully notes in the Washington Post, throughout his time occupying the White House, Trump continuously accused Barack Obama's second-term Secretary of State John Kerry of speaking to Iran, and continuously insisted Kerry was breaking the law when he did so, and continuously pressured his own Department of Justice to prosecute Kerry. And while that DOJ managed to stall Trump, it did investigate Kerry, while Trump and his dirigible Mike Pompeo kept up public pressure. In September 2018, Pompeo said Kerry was undermining U.S. policy, and he called it unseemly and unprecedented. Almost simultaneously, Trump wrote, John Kerry had illegal meetings with the very hostile Iranian regime. The next May, Trump said Kerry should be prosecuted on that. In March 2020, Trump literally accused Kerry of violating the Logan Act. So Trump says he's done the same thing he tried to get Trump prosecuted for, only with Vladimir effing Putin. And Vance is vague about whether or not it happens, but says it would be fine if Trump has kept talking to the dictator. And Putin's spokesman says it never happened. And Trump's minions deny he sent Putin COVID tests, and Putin's spokesman says, yeah, he did too. And this matters not only because it is added to that list of events that proves Trump has no connection to morality or reality or patriotism, but maybe more importantly, it really is a reminder in public from Putin to Trump as to who owns whom. Trump continuously drops Putin's name as if they are buddies. Who knows, maybe they met at mass murdering dictator night school. And he keeps doing it as if such references somehow helped Trump's image with thinking Americans. I think Putin, by confirming what Trump denied and denying what Trump confirmed, is reminding Trump, you should only speak when you are spoken to. Kamala Harris has raised $1 billion since becoming the Democratic presidential candidate. Is that a lot? In retrospect, the corruption and cash before Citizens United was the good old days. But somebody is going to raise $1 billion in just 81 days. If somebody is in position to buy the election with saturation advertising and get out the vote efforts, you want it to be your candidate. $1 billion, more than $1 billion, in fact, per the New York Times sources, is more than Trump has raised in all of 2024. Harris's figure is just since the afternoon of July 21st. Most, fastest. Two polls of note yesterday. YouGov for The Economist National closed Tuesday. Harris 49, Trump 45. And that is with Trump stooges Stein and West in the mix. Harris by 4. But far more interesting, something done by a new pollster called Blueprint for the website The Bulwark. It polled Republicans and independents who had supported Nikki Haley. And Trump is only getting 45% of them, and Kamala Harris is getting 36% of them. Lemmings gonna lemming, of course, but the interesting number here is that in the 2020 election, these same voters had gone for Trump by 59 to 28. Trump won them, the disaffected Republicans, by 31 points in 2020. He is winning them by just 9 points now. Haley's support in the Republican primaries this year was 20% of the votes cast, just under 4,400,000 votes. If the polling numbers are correct, and this is obviously a vast oversimplification, I mean, the polling numbers don't even account for nearly a fifth of Haley's supporters who are apparently undecided. But if it's even vaguely correct, just for context, just for a ballpark figure, it would mean that out of 4,400,000 Republicans and independents in this subset, Trump is only getting a net total of 320,000 votes out of 4.4 million. Any poll which suggests that more than 1/3 of any subset of Republican voters is voting for Kamala Harris is not just an important poll, but a goddamned important poll. The other headlines, Trump again kitty-kittied out of the second debate with Harris, and by the end of his social media post, he apparently thought he was writing some kind of business letter because his last sentence reads, quote, "Thank you for your attention to this matter." I don't know. Trump got laughed at on one podcast. Sure, you heard that. It was like when it happened at the United Nations. He clearly convinced himself they were laughing with him. They were chanting boo-ump. On a different podcast, Trump claimed 900 million people saw his interview with Elon Musk. By next week, it'll be 900 billion. Or that may be what Musk claims. Rumors continue to fly that Leon really does think he can get into the White House parasitically, that he will run the government while Trump is just the front man. You may have noticed by this point that I'm not particularly fond of Trump. But between the two of them, Trump is the smarter one if Musk thinks that Trump will let him actually run anything. Also, it's been confirmed Trump's special Bibles, the only ones that fit the head of the Oklahoma State School Board's requirement for the mandatory Bibles in public schools in Oklahoma, they are made in China. China. They cost $3 to make, and here, your price, just $59.99. Those are the sort of things that eventually send people to jail. And more evidence that's funny now because it shows how stupid Trump is and how he never learns, not even from public humiliation, but is also ominous because it underscores his knee-jerk reaction to criticism, which is to prosecute it. Trump again insisted, and I believe the first time he insisted it was in 2011 or 2012, that television news organizations all have licenses and that the licenses can be revoked. This time it's 60 Minutes and CBS, and as usual, it is as if he's heard the criticism of him somewhere in the background. In this case, criticism of the sane washing of his increasingly incoherent language, and assumed they couldn't be talking about him. They have to be talking about somebody else. Quote, I've never seen this before, but the producers of 60 Minutes sliced and diced, parentheses, cut and pasted, Kamala's answers to questions which were virtually incoherent over and over again, some by as many as 4 times in a single sentence or thought, all in an effort possibly illegal as part of the news division, which must be licensed to make her look more presidential or at least better. It may also be a major campaign finance violation. This is a stain on the reputation of 60 Minutes that is not recoverable. It will always remain with this once storied brand. I have never heard of such a thing being done in news. It is the very definition of fake news. The public is owed a major and immediate apology. I'd like a major apology, please, and a major award. This is an open and shut case and must be investigated starting today. That's the great 60 Minutes brand that he backed out of the interview with. There are no news licenses. You don't need one. No license for your pet fish, Eric, either. One assumes this starts somewhere in the 1950s when young, somewhat less crazy Donnie Trump finds out that individual television and radio stations are licensed by the government to operate over public airwaves. And since he never grows intellectually beyond that point, he thinks that the licenses CBS owns to operate Channel 2 in New York and Channel 2 in L.A. and Channel 62 in Detroit are somehow news licenses. But then again, if Trump actually understood what was happening, given the clumsiness of our nation in defending itself against him, we would be in real danger. Even in an America in which Trump's all too obvious affection for Hitler and the Nazis is actually exceeded by the psychoses of so many of his supporters, it would seem to be obvious that the last thing that even pro-Nazi Trumpist idiots would want to do would be to invoke February 20th, 1939. February 20th, 1939 was the day when, at the previous Madison Square Garden at 8th Avenue and 50th Street, also nowhere near Madison Square, the German-American Bund held a rally, and 20,000 showed up for a thinly veiled American Nazi rally, complete with a giant image of George Washington surrounded by swastikas. The problem was, of course, that the event was so close to the media nerve centers of 1939 that coverage was everywhere. Radio, every newsreel, every imaginable way of communicating the news. And much of the nation, the next day, became newly aware that there were 20,000 Nazis in New York. More impressively was that part of the nation that did not become newly aware. The Garden was that night surrounded by 100,000 anti-Nazi protesters who 3 times nearly broke lines manned by just under 2,500 police. As it was, the Nazi image in New York received fatal damage when a former Navy officer, now plumber's assistant named Isidore Greenbaum, sneaked inside the garden and, able to contain his rage no longer, rushed the stage. All by himself, him versus 19,999 Nazis, who did not know what to do next. And after a few flailed punches at Greenbaum, a handful of police stopped all of them, pulled Greenbaum out. He was uninjured and fined $25. With that as the history of pro-fascism and pro-despotism and pro-Nazism in New York City at Madison Square Garden, what have Trump and Garden and New York Knicks and Rangers owner James Dolan done? They have scheduled a Trump Nazi rally on October 27th at Madison Square Garden. They hope to get 20,000 people, exactly as many as attended the German-American Bund Swastika Fest on February 20th, 1939. The means of ticket distribution is unclear. If it is like previous Trump rallies, it could easily be sabotaged by phony registrations or even swamped by counter-protesters who managed to fake their way inside. Apart from the impact on Dolan's sports teams, I mean, he's got a lot of authoritarian white trash running the hockey franchise, but I'm beginning to think the Knicks players may not be happy about sharing their building with the ever-increasingly racist Trump. Apart from that, there is the second half of the 1939 disaster that Trump, and especially this idiot clown Dolan, need to think about, and think about real hard in time to cancel this thing before it is too late for them. 20,000 inside with 5 times as many outside Madison Square Garden waiting for them. Oh, and compared to the old Madison Square Garden at 8th and 50th, the new Madison Square Garden, sitting atop Penn Station, has far more open room and space to stand around and wait in. And good luck to you, James Dolan. Maybe he'll open for Trump by singing. And then most of the 20,000 people will leave, and there won't be trouble. By the way, to clear up a previous point and make a new one with the same topic, lemmings, like Trump idiots showing up in the heart of Manhattan without thinking they may be outnumbered 5-1 or worse, do not actually commit mass suicide. They do, sometimes, it turns out, accidentally kill themselves in large numbers because their instinct to migrate in order to mate is so strong that, to put it non-scientifically, they sometimes don't look where they're going. There's a cliff. Oh, never mind. So the comp with Trump cultists still fits, just in a different way. Also of interest here, more news about another one of my exes. No, not that one. Yeah, I know, not that one. The one between them. The one with the husband in trouble. Also, Jesse Bruno Waters and Stephen Nosferatu Miller suggest men can attract the ladies by wearing their Trump support on their sleeves. Maybe at Madison Square Garden. I'm not going to give my main joke away, but it rhymes. Why, here's coincidence. It rhymes with Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
This is Sports Center. Wait, check that. Not anymore. This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
From the Sports Central Center news desk tonight, Dateline, New York. The 2024 Lester Patrick Award for service to hockey in the United States, no, of America, goes to Sam Rosen. For being my first boss? I mean, I know that very few people besides Sam could have survived being my first boss, but still, a major award for that? Oh, actually, it goes to the individual who has done the most to grow hockey in this country. And Sam, who has been the voice of the New York Rangers so long that when he was my first boss a mere 45 years ago, he had already been the backup play-by-play announcer for the Rangers for 2 years, got the TV job full-time in 1984 and has been doing it ever since, and is scheduled to retire at the end of the season. Yeah, I'll believe that when I see it. Lester Patrick, meanwhile, who began playing big-time hockey in 1904, helped start the sport on the West Coast and was the first coach of the Rangers in 1926. Famously, in Game 2 of the 1928 Stanley Cup Finals, the Rangers goaltender was knocked cold by a shot, and there were no backups in those days. So Lester Patrick, at age 43 and having never been a goalie in his life, donned the unconscious goalie's uniform and played goal for the rest of the game. The Rangers won that game in overtime against the Montreal Maroons and then went on to win their first Stanley Cup. Coincidentally, Sam broadcast that legendary Lester Patrick game in 1928 on radio, and Lester was Sam's first color man with the Rangers. Wait, I think that no, that's a typo. Sorry, Sam, that's a typo. I think it's a typo. Congratulations, Samala. Of us on this edition of Countdown, following this Tony DeCopel story at CBS. He attacks an author during an interview, and CBS News is ready to suspend him or fire him or something, and then the owner of CBS says, no, I like the interview. And she talks to him directly, and the next thing you know, there's a recording of the meeting with his bosses yelling at him, and that goes public, and so everything over there at CBS News is an effing mess? You may know this, maybe you don't. I haven't seen it mentioned a lot. You know who Tony DeCopel's wife is, right? Well, yes, you're correct. The odds are 6-5 that whoever it is, it's one of my exes. And if you place that bet, in this case, you won because he's married to Katie Tur. And when Katie Tur first asked me to write her Trump book for her, and when I said we'd never get away with that because people would recognize how I wrote, when the book finally came out, she essentially erased me from it, and later told me she had done so she would not anger her new husband, Tony DeCopel. Honestly, if my exes continue to make this much news, I'm going to have to assign them uniform numbers. The Katie book story coming up in more things I promised not to tell. Should give them numbers. Number 174. First, there's still more new idiots to talk about. The daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's worst persons in the world. The bronze, Maria Bartiromo, the stupidest person in America. It's one thing to deny facts every day, to say up is down, to lie and propagandize and make Tokyo Rose look like Edward R. Murrow, to sell your soul for... I don't know. I don't know what she gets out of it. Shoes? I don't know what she gets out of it. She's on Fox Business. It doesn't pay as well as the original Fox Crack channel. I don't know what she gets out of it. But beyond all that, to get owned again and again on your own show by your own guests, even the ones from your own Nazi party who are supposed to be there helping you bullshit America day after day. How is it possible, Maria Bartiromo says, condescension dripping from her nose, that FEMA is out of money? Reading a list of complaints against the administration off the teleprompter in front of her as her guest, the Republican Congressman French Hill, and what the F kind of name is that, nods. She repeats, how is FEMA out of money? Which is when Congressman Hill snaps. And Congressman Hill, a Republican, says, FEMA is not out of money. I can't show you this. This is a podcast, and that's video. But Maria Bartiromo was so shocked by the unauthorized truth from French Hill that her eyes and eyebrows shot up so fast her fake eyelashes fell off. The runner-up worser, Senator Marco Rubio, that's Mark O'Rubio, the Mitt Romney of Maria Bartiromos. This is why spending the entirety of your wasted time in the Senate quietly sowing the seeds of doubt that anything a Democrat says could be true, that anything the federal government says must be a lie, why that's going to wind up not just killing innocent people, but killing many of the people who voted for you. Last Friday, Marco Rubio responded to the government monthly employment data release by writing, quote, "Another fake jobs report out from the Biden-Harris government today. All the fake numbers in the world aren't going to fool people, unquote. I'm actually a U.S. senator, despite my behavior suggesting I'm something closer to a lunatic." When the president came back at Marco Rubio for lying like that, Rubio doubled down on his allegations that it was a fake jobs report out of the government. Then, suddenly, Marco Rubio's feed turned into pleas to Floridians to follow what the government says, do what the government says, follow government instructions to the letter, get out of Florida, there's a hurricane. Well, why would they do that? On Friday, he's telling them the government lies to them all the time and all government information is fake. On Monday, he's telling them, well, except for right now. Last April, this twerp Rubio issued a press release praising his own op-ed at the Federalist site, which is itself devoted to telling everybody that the government is lying to them. The press release begins, quote, ICYMI, Rubio takes on elites for defending the deep state. Elites love the deep state because they loathe the American people. U.S. Senator Marco Rubio, R. Florida, that's R for Rubio. It comes as no surprise that America's self-proclaimed newspaper of record is leading the charge to defend the deep state. Left-wing elites, this is all the press release. Left-wing elites want to protect the deep state because it shields them from accountability as they pursue their own agendas. That's 4 uses of the deep state and 3 different references to the elites at the start of his press release, and Rubio insisting to his constituents that those people, the government, loathe the American people, quote unquote. But he thinks his voters will be smart enough to listen and do what the government says just about hurricanes. Marco, how smart could your constituents be? After all, they voted for you. As a worser adjacent, there's Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, who insists all efforts to make new homes environmentally sound and all new construction more suited to the climate crisis, those are a Biden plot to raise prices so the Chinese can make more money. Now she's urging residents to evacuate, but she's still including her own psychosis in which she says that all of this is being done so FEMA can spend its money on immigrants. Also, Anna Paulina's real name is Meyerhofer. Right you are, Ms. Meyerhofer. And her German grandfather was literally drafted into the Nazi Air Force, the Wehrmacht. But you're supposed to believe her and Rubio and the government now. Not last week, and certainly not next week. It's funny. It's stupid. They're stupid. They could disappear tomorrow and nobody would know that Rubio or Anna Paulina Meyerhofer are gone. But there is tragedy in this. And it'll be too late to do anything about it when these idiots get some of their own constituents killed. And still, they're not the winners. The winners, Stephen Nosferatu Miller from the Trump campaign and Jesse Eraserhead Waters from the other Trump campaign, Fox News. Miller, who looks kind of like a flat Stanley, only more like he was made out of construction paper, and who genuinely resembles Max Schreck, the German actor who played Count Orlok in the silent film horror classic Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror. You know Miller, All the parts of Trump's speeches that have sentences that each feature a noun, a verb, and a threat against minorities, Miller wrote those. Miller comes on Waters' show, and if you're looking for an entertainment comp for him, Waters is the great Eugene Levy as Dr. Tongue's assistant Bruno in SCTV. You know, John Candy is Dr. Tongue in Dr. Tongue's 3D House of Cats, and Dr. Tongue's 3D House of Stewardesses, and Dr. Tongue's 3D House of Pancakes. His assistant in this, Eugene Levy, is Bruno. That's who Waters looks like. All right, so preamble mercifully over and scene set. Miller comes on and Waters greets him with this, quote, "We have to address the elephant in the room. We're getting a lot of texts from women about Stephen Miller. Our audience believes you are some sort of sexual matador." Unquote. Wait, some sort of sexual matador? You mean a bull gored Stephen Miller in the genitals? Anyway, Stephen Miller is loving this because both of these men are very, very odd. And I don't know about their personal lives, and I don't care about their personal lives, and I don't want to know about their personal lives. But if you are looking for people about whom you will someday hear, nobody in our family knew anything about his so-called hobby, these are two first-round draft choices for you. Miller and Waters. Anyway, so Waters says this about sexual matadors, and Stephen Miller, almost drooling, replies to Jesse Waters, "Some advice to any young man out there. If you are a young man who's looking to impress the ladies, to be the alpha, to be attractive, the best thing you can do is wear your Trump support on your sleeve. Show that you are a real man. Show that you are not a beta. Be a proud and loud Trump supporter, and your dating life will be fantastic." And yes, he pronounced it as beta, as in, "Better get a bucket, I'm going to throw up." But setting that aside for a moment, let's re-examine Stephen Miller's answer there. Wear your Trump support on your sleeve. Let's see, what is it that the fascists and the Trumpists and the Republicans and the original Nazis would wear on their sleeves to show their support for their Fuhrer? Oh, right, red armbands with swastikas. Jesse, I like matadors. They wear tight pants, Waters. And Stephen, wear your Trump support on your sleeve. The armband goes with any attire, Miller. Today's worst persons in the world! On January 22nd, 2017, Katie Tur of MSNBC asked me to write her Trump book for her. She was serious, and there are receipts. I'll get back to the book story. But first, since last spring, when her second book came out, I have read story after story that boiled down to one of the headlines I read that was, Katie Tur's relationship with Keith Olbermann haunted her. Now, the articles have not been overtly negative, except in a passive-aggressive sense, although try out that headline on yourself there and see if you like to be described as haunting someone. But she wrote a book claiming that many experiences, somehow including the time she lived with me, hurt and slowed and limited her career. So all this time I have remained silent about the nearly 3 years she and I lived together, and the 8 years after that during which I remained her good and loyal friend, and I have remained silent even though the day she moved into my place in New York, she expected a New York TV station would hire her with no experience and no audition tape, and I have remained silent about how her father, whom she has never stopped trashing, sent her $10,000 worth of cameras and editing equipment to help her get started. And I have remained silent about how I pushed her to not just sit there staring at all that equipment her dad sent, but to use it to go cover stories so she could at least make a tape. And I have remained silent even though once she didn't like something I told her and she immediately said she was thinking of calling the New York Post gossip page and telling them terrible things about me. And I have remained silent that after I asked her to move out, I paid her rent at a new apartment for a year so she could keep working and living in New York. And I have remained silent even though I paid off her college loans. And when she complained that every time you Googled her name, you also got my name, I loaned her the money to hire a company that altered her Google results. And I have remained silent even though I introduced her to her first agent and to all the people who hired her at News 12 and WPIX and WNBC and NBC News. And I have remained silent even though when she happened to be assigned to Trump's campaign announcement and Trump knew who she was, because when we lived together, it was in one of these Trump buildings here, and she got to do the last great actual interview with him, and NBC promptly offered her the chance to be its reporter on his campaign. She called me and said, "No, I'm going back to London. I don't like politics. You know that." I was the one who told her she was nuts. And this wasn't politics. It was dark, terrible history in progress. And she sighed and said, "Fine, okay, send me some books about it." And I have remained silent even though she sent me nearly all of her scripts for her NBC News stories, including her Trump campaign coverage in 2016, and I edited nearly every one of them, and several times I had to completely rewrite them for her. And I have remained silent even though when her father announced he was transitioning, the friend she called up in hysterics was me. And I have remained silent even though she twice lied to reporters and editors at the New York Times and the Washington Post, telling them she had asked me on their behalf to do interviews with them about her. And I have remained silent even though she lied to them that I had declined the interviews. And I have remained silent even though 6 days after my emergency appendectomy in 2007, she started punching and slapping me with real intent to do harm because the living room wasn't clean enough in our place. And how exactly do you even try to defend yourself against a woman 125 pounds lighter and a foot shorter than you? So yesterday I'm reading stories about her husband getting a vasectomy, and I'm sitting there waiting to see how she managed to make this one my fault. When Katie's first book came out, she reduced our entire history to a throwaway anecdote defending Kellyanne Conway. The story described me as somebody she had dated briefly in her 20s. After the book came out, and frankly and calmly, I don't know for certain who wrote her first book. I mean, people who can't write suddenly can find their muse. It's possible she wrote it, and her other books too. But after the first book came out that dismissed 3 years of our shared life as dating briefly in her 20s, I told her she had been awful to me, and she replied, "I'm sorry, you're right, I'm a terrible person, and it is the last thing we ever discussed." I told her I would not communicate with her again, and I have not, nor have I spoken about her publicly. But I do keep wondering about that book. I still have a text from her from 9:14 p.m. on December 11th, 2016, after she had signed her contract for her book, which became Unbelievable. An ironic title. It reads, "Do you still want to share your Trump doc with me?" Doc here meaning my trove of documents, my hundreds of pages of Trump notes that I had kept for use in my GQ video series. And I joked back, "Sure, how much?" And she joked back, $10, $20. And I emailed it all to her for free that night with only one request: don't leave me out of your acknowledgments in the book. And guess what? She left me out of the acknowledgments in the book, too. More than a month later, at 2:35 p.m. on Sunday, January 22nd, I had just returned home from Los Angeles and doing Bill Maher's show, and Katie Tur texted me about why they had never invited her on. And then she switched topics to ask, quote, "Want to write this book?" I had taken a nap, so it was not until 5:32 that I replied, "What? Well, you're not serious. How would that work?" That's when she phoned. She was about to give the advance money back to the publisher, she said. "I can't write a book. I'm like 50,000 words short, and it's terrible. I'll give you half the money. I'll give you more than half the money." I pointed out to her that I had written or rewritten dozens of her stories for NBC News and MSNBC, and it was not a question of money. It was a question of what we could get away with. No viewer, and maybe only one executive in a million, would ever notice that one sentence or one paragraph of script in her 2-minute report was actually written by me. First of all, she was the one saying it. Each time I wrote or rewrote in her name for NBC, it was a fireable offense for her, but one that nobody would ever think to look for, even though there is necessarily an email trail 10 miles long. But writing a book for her about Trump? In my writing style, not read aloud by her, but in print? I have a pretty distinct writing style, which I don't think I could ever sufficiently hide for more than about 17 words at a stretch. Somebody would notice. Her publisher might cancel it or even sue, or if it got published, NBC might notice it and fire her. It was not just a bad idea for her and very dubious ethically, but it stood an excellent chance of destroying her career and damaging mine, maybe. She said, okay, you're right. And she told me she was going to talk it over with her boyfriend, Tony, from CBS that night, and her thought was to give back the advance and cancel the book. And I said, ghostwriter, maybe? And she said, like who? And I said, I had no idea. I tried to joke her out of these grim prospects by reminding her that at least for the several $1,000s worth of research I gave her, I had cut the price to no dollars and no cents. And anyway, the next thing I knew, the book was published. There isn't a paragraph of it that reads like the rest of her writing, and I get reduced in it from the guy she lived with for 3 years who started her career to somebody she dated briefly in her 20s and the dark half of an anecdote defending Kellyanne freaking con job. I will say, I think the things I glossed over before about the New York Times and Washington Post were genuinely deplorable. The thing about the Post first. A Washington Post reporter I'd known for more than a decade named Paul Farhi called me up and asked me to do an interview with him about Katie, and I had my doubts. As I said to Paul, this is at least a little sexist. When I broke through at MSNBC in 1998, nobody called up one of my ex-girlfriends, even the ones in the business, to ask one of them about me. This was an unfair gradient for her or any woman that the first thing a reporter or just somebody Googling her brought up or found was her boyfriend or ex-boyfriend, especially me. It is utter misogyny, in fact. On the other hand, there could be a calculation in which it is useful to Katie if I do the interview and amplify the publicity. It is also one of the things I had warned her about literally the day we started dating. And in fact, I reminded her of it the night of the first real date at an Al Gore book event at the Museum of Natural History in New York in the Whale Room. Sure enough, I went from the Whale Room to the men's room for a moment while I was out. An online gossip clown who had been following us around went over and pretended he knew her or something, and when I got back, she was bubbling over, telling me she'd met a friend of a friend and told him all about us, and I asked if she had remembered my warning, and she obviously had not, and, quote, Katie Tur, new girlfriend of Keith Olbermann, was online before we got home. So when she found there was a way to scrub your Google searches so every time somebody plugged in her name, they would not also get Keith Olbermann's girlfriend or Keith Olbermann's ex-girlfriend, as I said, I helped her pay to use that service. I get it. The sexism prevails. Maybe it'll go away someday. Maybe it won't. So anyway, when Farhi of the Post called me up, I called Katie. She said she thought it was sexist. And anyway, she wasn't participating with the Post's story on her, and it would really help if I did not do so either. So I declined the interview. And a week later, there in the Washington Post was a big feature on Katie Tur. Because guess what? She did participate with it after all. Complete interview. And worse yet, she told Farhi that she had encouraged me to do the interview with him, so he put it in the paper that I declined to be interviewed, so I looked like an idiot. And another thing, I'm not mad. Please don't put in the newspaper that I got mad. I called her up and I yelled at her, and she apologized, and she promised she would not do anything like that ever again. And she promptly did something even worse. A month or two later, the New York Times article comes out. It is a huge profile of her, I think in the magazine or a weekend edition, and in it, Mr. Olbermann refused to be interviewed for this story. This is a complete surprise to me. I didn't even recognize the writer's name. I found her contact info, and I reached out to her and said, have we ever spoken? And she says, no. And I say, emails, texts? And she says, no. And then I say, then when did I refuse to be interviewed for your Katie Tur article for the New York Times? And she says, oh, I asked Katie Tur to ask you. And Katie Tur asked you, and you told Katie Tur you refused to be interviewed. And I said, none of that happened. And there is a long silence on the end of the phone. And then the writer says, let me call the editor to take that part out. And the Times changed the online version of why I didn't do the interview, although they do not note that they changed it. And I later got a note from a Times editor apologizing. She just lied to this reporter from the Times. Just lied. Oh, I'll call him and ask. Oh, he told me he doesn't want to talk to you about me. Just lied, and I just sat there. And I know, very unlike me, I have to say. I was actually too angry to do anything. Anyway, as I mentioned, Katie Tur published another book this year, and a lot of the publicity was about how I haunted her, and she had to go to great lengths to separate her career from mine, even as she keeps mentioning me, and even though she asked me in dead seriousness to write the first book for her. The book, the second one, is mostly about all the impediments and roadblocks she has faced, while, forging her career. But I will add this last point and then drop the subject, I hope, forever. For 43 years full-time, I have done this. And counting college, it's, God help me, 47 years. And throughout that stretch, I have tried to acknowledge anybody and everybody who helped me in my career, even the ones I don't like, even people who are totally, utterly politically opposed to me. I still think fondly of Stuart Varney from Fox News because he taught me, when I was right up against it one night, how to use a teleprompter. I'll always cherish the memory of working with Stuart Varney. He was such a help to me. Politically, we could have a duel. But of course, as I said, the dynamic is different. I'm a guy. Still, her book is about people who hindered her, and almost none of it is about people who helped her. She is rapidly turning into a kind of professional martyrdom. I saw this in its earliest stages 16 years ago, and she is now going from making it martyrdom into a brand. And I'll say this lastly and sincerely. If your story of your career is all about people you think held you back, and not even mostly about the people who bent over backwards to help you along, that is all just very, very sad. Okay, I just have to say this. For like 3 weeks, it was Olivia week. For the last week, it's been Katie week. Are we going to have another week of Katie week? When are the lawyers coming back in the Olivia case? Is the FBI going to get involved? Is the FBI going to get involved in the Katie case? Are they going to be the same agents? Will I know any of them because they had something to do with my fake anthrax sender who sent me anthrax when Katie was living with me? From California. Wait a minute. Okay, I just had to vent that. You date a lot, this is what happens. And I didn't even have to wear my Trump support on my sleeve like Stephen Miller, if that is your real name. I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. No, Anna Paulina Luna's grandfather really was a Nazi Wehrmacht member. Drafted. Nevertheless, you can flee. I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. We're now back to 5 episodes a week, posting nightly just after midnight Eastern. And please follow me for the podcast promo videos on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter X, Instagram, and InstaTube. Once again, we have Monday countdowns, so please send this podcast to somebody who does not know that they need to listen, but should. Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel, the long-suffering musical directors of Countdown, arranged, produced, and performed most of our music. Mr. Chanel handled the orchestration and the keyboards. Mr. Ray was on the guitars, bass, and drums. And it was produced by TKO Brothers. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, Nancy Faust. The sports music is the Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Other music arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed, and my announcer today was my friend, Nancy Faust. Everything else was pretty much my fault or that of one of my ex-girlfriends. That's Countdown for today, 3 weeks and 5 days until the 2024 presidential election. The 1,374th day since convicted felon drooling J. Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. Use the election. Use the mental health system. Use presidential immunity if you have to, President Biden, to keep him from doing it again. Well, we still can. The next scheduled countdown is tomorrow. Bulletins as the news requires. Till then, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.